Well, good morning and welcome back to Musings of a Texas Preacher Man. I'm Scott Fisher, and I'm glad you've chosen to study with me this morning. Well, my wife Tammy and I spent the past week on vacation. We went to Costa Rica with friends and had a great time at the beach, but it's great to be back home and back to our morning videos. I'd planned to be back with you on Tuesday, but honestly, it took a few more days to prepare than I'd planned. We're in the midst of a study on the subject of the blood of Abel, the shedding of innocent blood by Israel, and martyr vindication. Today we'll continue to unpack the prophetic and eschatological nature of the vindication of the blood of the martyrs, specifically looking at what Paul had to say. We're going to be in Acts, we're going to be in the book of Romans, we're also going to be in the book of Habakkuk. Now, I believe that for the most part, we've missed the focus of the book of Acts. It's the story of the transition from the Old Covenant era to the New Covenant. It's the story of the rejection of the gospel by the majority of the Jews and the Jewish persecution of the followers of Jesus, the promised Messiah of Israel, and the Savior of the whole world. It's the story of the expansion of the gospel, the kingdom, to the Gentiles in fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy. The book of Acts is also prophetic, proclaiming to the apostate Jews the impending judgment that was about to come upon them, just as their own historic biblical prophets had declared would come about at the time of Messiah. Now, to ignore these themes found throughout the book of Acts is to completely miss the story it's telling. In Romans, Paul's magnum opus, he lays out the equality of standing before God by both Jews and Gentiles. Both are in need of the saving grace found only through faith in Jesus, a salvation available to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. From the very first sentence, and by the way, Paul wrote very long sentences. This first sentence of the book of Romans is 7 verses long. He states very clearly that his intent, indeed his appointed mission, is to take the gospel to the Gentiles. In verse 5 he writes, quote, "Through whom we have received grace and apostleship to bring about the obedience of faith among all the Gentiles for his name's sake." Now, the Gentile expansion is my focus here this morning, but I also want to draw your attention to an important phrase that Paul uses here. Quote, "the obedience of faith." Now, he was appointed by Jesus himself to take the gospel to the Gentiles, to, quote, "bring about the obedience of faith among all the Gentiles." Don't miss or minimize or ignore that phrase, the obedience of faith. It's going to become very important as we continue in this study over the next few weeks. Now, let's pick up his comments beginning in Romans 1, verses 16 and 17. "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. For in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, but the righteous man shall live by faith." Now, Paul clearly understands that the gospel was sent first to the Jews. Jesus and his apostles clearly taught this, to the Jews first, but not exclusively, not to the neglect of the Gentiles. Now, when Jesus sent out the 12 disciples in Matthew chapter 10, he gives them the following very specific instruction. We pick it up at verse 5. "Do not go in the way of the Gentiles. Do not enter any city of the Samaritans, but rather go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And as you go, preach, saying the kingdom of heaven is at hand." Then he goes on to warn them that they're going to be hated and persecuted, and he closes out his instruction with the following statement in verse 23, "But whenever they persecute you in one city, flee to the next. For truly I say to you, you will not finish going through the cities of Israel until the Son of Man comes. Now think about this. He calls his disciples and sends them out to preach the gospel of the kingdom. The kingdom is at hand. The kingdom is near. The kingdom is within you. He sends them out to heal the sick and to cast out demons. And he ends with this final instruction here. You will not finish going through the cities of Israel until the Son of Man comes. Well, folks, he was present. He was the one talking to them. What coming is he talking about? That they would not finish going through the cities of Israel until the Son of Man comes. They're to focus on the preaching of the gospel to all the cities of Israel, but they won't even complete that before the Son of Man comes. It's a direct reference to his coming in covenantal judgment on Jerusalem, Judea, and Israel. Now, let's go back to Romans 1. After stating the gospel of salvation was for the Jew first and also for the Greek, Paul then says that in the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith. As it is written, but the righteous man shall live by faith. Now let's get it down as simple as possible. The righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith is the revelation of Jesus as the promised Messiah. And Paul also, with this, introduces another concept that we're going to see throughout all of his writings. And this concept is this, that righteousness, faith, and obedience are tied together. They cannot be separated. Believing in the gospel is believing that Jesus is the promised one, that there is no other path of salvation than through him. Living by faith is living in belief and embracing him and his ways. Now, what's really interesting to me is that Paul quotes, but the righteous man shall live by faith, a direct quote from Habakkuk chapter 2. What's really amazing about Paul quoting from Habakkuk is that he does it multiple times. Now, Habakkuk is a vision of the destruction of Jerusalem at some point in the prophet's future. Chapter 1 of Habakkuk describes the coming destruction. We'll be looking at that tomorrow. In chapter 2, he says, beginning at verse 2, then the Lord answered me and said, record the vision and inscribe it on tablets, that the one who reads it may what? May run. Listen, this vision is a vision that is shock and awe. It is a vision of the destruction of Jerusalem. For the vision, verse 3, is yet for the what? The appointed time, the day, the specific day. And it hastens toward the goal, and it will not fail. Folks, what he's saying is, you can take this to the bank. It is going to happen, and though it tarries, wait for it. It will certainly come. It will not delay. Behold, as for the proud one, his soul is not right within him, but the righteous will live by his faith. Now, what Paul does, he applies the prophecy of Habakkuk's coming day of judgment to the time of Messiah, the time that Paul was living in. After stating in Romans chapter 1, verse 17, the righteous man shall live by faith, the very next statement he makes in verse 18, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who do what? who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Now listen, Paul is speaking about a very specific day of judgment. The wrath of God is going to come against Jerusalem in covenantal judgment. It's coming against the ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. These are the ones who crucified the Lord. These are the ones who persecuted and even killed the apostles and the early first followers of Jesus. This is the shedding of innocent blood. This is the pouring out of wrath that's coming upon apostate Israel. And it happens in just a few short years after Paul writes this, because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them. Now, this is not coincidental. The wrath and judgment of God, the day of wrath, spoken of by the Old Testament prophets, repeated by Jesus and the apostles, was speaking of a specific day of judgment, the destruction of Jerusalem, the destruction of the temple, the complete and permanent removal of the inferior Old Covenant and everything associated with it. Now listen, we're going to pick back up right here tomorrow morning. We're going to be looking in Habakkuk chapter 1. We're going to be in the book of Acts. We're going to be back in Romans. And we're going to be in this study right here for the foreseeable future. We're going to continue to look at Paul's understanding of the coming judgment against Jerusalem, the avenging of the shedding of innocent blood, and this transition from the Old Covenant to the New Covenant. Now let me encourage you, don't give up. Don't react. Don't ignore the Scriptures. Now I want to thank you for studying with me this morning. And if what I'm sharing with you goes against what you've always believed, don't be afraid or intimidated. Study the Word. Go back and review the previous episodes. Follow the text. Wrestle with what it has to say. And we'll continue in our study of the truth of the Messianic kingdom and continue to look at the vengeance poured out on Jerusalem for the blood of the righteous. I want to thank you for joining me for Musings of a Texas Preacher Man. I hope you'll continue to join me Tuesday mornings through Friday mornings each week. Now, this week, because I didn't post a video on Tuesday and Wednesday, I will be posting again tomorrow morning on Friday, and then again on Saturday morning, just this week. So why not click on the subscribe button on the lower right corner of your screen, and you'll be notified in YouTube whenever a new video gets posted. And if you're watching on Facebook, consider sharing this on your wall and invite your friends to watch it. And if you saw it on Twitter, retweet it and encourage your friends to watch. If you live in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, why not join me on Tuesday nights at 7 p.m. for Tuesday Nights in the Word? Come on out and join us. Hey, I hope you'll make today a great day.